The night the vampire king married a poor waitress, every noble vampire bowed their heads. Only the bride looked completely terrified. 7 days earlier, Emma Carter had been worrying about something far less dramatic than marrying a king. She was wondering whether the $38 in her apron pocket would be enough to cover groceries after paying another portion of her mother's hospital bill. The answer, like most nights, was probably not. She tightened the faded black apron around her waist and pushed open the back door of Ashwood Grill as the cold November wind swept across the parking lot. Downtown Boston glittered with expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and polished office towers that reflected the city lights like glass mountains. Emma admired them the same way people admire distant stars. Beautiful to look at. Impossible to reach. She checked the time on her phone. 4:53 p.m. Her dinner shift started in exactly 7 minutes. Missing even one table assignment meant losing tips, and losing tips meant choosing between gas for her 10-year-old sedan or prescription medication for her mother. There was never enough money for both. "You're late," her manager barked before she had even stepped completely inside. Table 12 already asked for service. Emma apologized quietly, although she wasn't actually late. She never argued anymore. Arguments didn't pay bills. They only made long nights feel even longer. Within minutes she was weaving between polished oak tables carrying heavy trays balanced on one arm. Business executives discussed mergers over expensive steaks. Couples celebrated anniversaries with bottles of wine that cost more than Emma earned in 2 days. She smiled politely, refilled glasses before anyone asked, and thanked every customer whether they tipped generously or left nothing at all. Kindness had become less of a personality and more of a survival skill. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the tall front windows. The weather forecast had warned of the first major storm of the season. Most people hurried indoors. The restaurant became even busier. "Did you hear?" another waitress whispered while polishing silverware beside the service station. "They say Lucian Ashford is coming back tonight." Emma looked up. "Who's that?" The other waitress stared as if Emma had admitted she had never heard of electricity. "Seriously?" "Ashford Industries. Billionaire. Owns half the city. Nobody knows where he disappears for months at a time, but every time he comes back, something huge happens." Emma shrugged with a tired smile. Billionaires belonged in newspapers, not in her life. Whoever he was, he would still need someone to refill his coffee. A family with 2 young children asked for extra napkins. An elderly couple requested hot tea because of the cold rain outside. Emma hurried from one table to another, moving with practiced grace despite the ache in her feet after nearly 12 straight hours of work between 2 jobs. She noticed little things other people ignored. The lonely widower eating dinner by himself. The exhausted nurse still wearing hospital scrubs. The little girl who quietly slid her untouched dessert toward her younger brother because he had smiled at it first. Small acts of kindness always caught Emma's attention. They reminded her that difficult days didn't erase good hearts. At exactly 6:22, the conversations inside Ashwood Grill changed without anyone announcing why. Forks paused halfway to plates. Waiters instinctively straightened their uniforms. Even the manager quickly adjusted his tie before looking toward the entrance. Emma followed everyone's gaze. The front door opened slowly. Cold air drifted inside with the rain. A tall man stepped across the threshold wearing a perfectly tailored black overcoat, his dark hair damp from the storm, his expression calm enough to silence an entire room without speaking a single word. Emma had never seen him before. She had no idea that the man quietly removing his gloves by the entrance was the Vampire King. Emma noticed the silence before she noticed the man. It spread through the restaurant like an invisible tide, washing away every conversation until only the gentle sound of rain remained against the windows. Even the kitchen staff seemed to move more carefully. Her manager hurried toward the entrance with a smile she had never seen him wear before. Welcome back, Mr. Ashford. Your usual table is ready. The stranger acknowledged him with a small nod that somehow carried more authority than a speech. He walked through the dining room without rushing, yet everyone instinctively stepped aside. Emma found herself watching him longer than she intended. There was something unusual about him. Not merely his expensive clothes or confident posture. Those were common among wealthy customers. It was the strange calm surrounding him, as though the noise of the world simply refused to exist within a few feet of where he stood. His pale face showed little emotion, but it was not coldness. It felt more like someone who had seen centuries of storms and no longer feared the weather. Emma. Her manager's sharp voice pulled her back to reality. Table 17. You are serving Mr. Ashford tonight. Do not make mistakes. Several waitresses exchanged nervous glances. One quietly whispered, "Good luck." Emma almost laughed. She had served demanding lawyers, celebrities, and politicians before. They all wanted the same things. Hot food, fresh coffee, and someone who listened politely. She picked up a menu, straightened her apron, and walked toward table 17. The man was studying the rain outside instead of the menu resting unopened before him. Up close, his appearance became even more striking. His skin seemed almost untouched by the warmth of the restaurant lights, giving him an elegant, timeless appearance. His charcoal gray eyes reflected the storm beyond the glass with quiet intensity. Emma smiled naturally. Good evening, sir. Welcome to Ashwood Grill. May I bring you something warm while you decide? He slowly turned toward her. For one brief moment, those gray eyes rested on her face with complete attention. It was not the casual glance customers usually gave their servers. It was careful. Observant. Almost curious. What do you recommend? He asked. His voice was calm and deep, carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. Emma glanced at the menu. If it were me, I would order the roasted herb chicken with mashed potatoes. It is the chef's favorite, and the soup tonight is homemade. It is perfect on a rainy evening. Something almost resembling a smile appeared for the first time. Then I will trust your recommendation. She wrote the order and started to leave before hesitating. Would you like coffee while you wait? Only if you are having some as well. Emma blinked in surprise before smiling awkwardly. Employees are not allowed to drink coffee during dinner service. That sounds unfortunate, he replied quietly. She laughed without thinking. It was a small laugh, soft and genuine. The sound seemed strangely unfamiliar inside the silent restaurant. Several nearby guests glanced toward table 17, apparently surprised anyone would speak so casually with the city's most mysterious businessmen. Emma did not notice their reactions. She only noticed that this customer seemed unexpectedly kind. A few minutes later she returned carrying the steaming bowl of soup. Before she could place it on the table, she noticed an elderly man near the entrance struggling to keep his balance while folding a dripping umbrella. Without hesitation, Emma set the tray safely on a nearby station. I am sorry, sir. I will be right back. She hurried across the room to steady the older gentleman, helped him remove his heavy coat, and guided him carefully to his chair before returning with an apologetic smile. Thank you for waiting. Lucian Ashford had not touched his soup. He had spent every second watching the young waitress help someone who could offer her nothing in return. And for the first time in many decades, something ancient inside the Vampire King stirred with quiet interest. Lucian thanked her with a quiet nod before lifting the spoon, but his attention remained on Emma instead of the soup. Across the restaurant she moved with effortless purpose, carrying heavy trays, answering questions, calming impatient customers, and somehow remembering every small request without writing most of them down. She smiled at every table exactly the same way. Not because she expected larger tips, but because she believed every person deserved kindness. That alone made her different. Most humans treated generosity like a transaction. Emma treated it like breathing. 10 minutes later, a young boy accidentally dropped his glass of lemonade. Ice cubes scattered across the polished hardwood floor, and the child immediately burst into tears. His mother looked embarrassed as nearby diners turned toward the noise. Before anyone else reacted, Emma knelt beside the little boy with a warm smile. "Do not worry. Glasses are much easier to replace than smiles." The boy looked up uncertainly. Emma reached into her apron pocket and produced a small wrapped chocolate she had been saving for herself during her break. "I think brave helpers deserve rewards. Would you help me by making sure everyone stays away from the broken glass?" The child's expression brightened instantly. He nodded proudly while Emma quickly cleaned the spill before another employee could even arrive. Around the dining room, several customers quietly smiled at the simple exchange before returning to their meals. Lucian noticed something else. She never looked around to see who had witnessed her kindness. She simply returned to work as though nothing remarkable had happened. That interested him far more than any grand gesture ever could. His phone vibrated once against the table. The screen displayed only one name. Adrian. Lucian answered without removing his eyes from the dining room. "Speak." "Your Majesty," the calm voice said softly. "The council has assembled. They expected your arrival 20 minutes ago." Lucian remained silent for a moment. "Tell them they will wait." There was a brief pause on the other end. "The elders will not appreciate another delay. That is their burden, not mine." He ended the call before another word could be spoken. Across the room, Emma was helping an elderly woman carefully read the dessert menu after noticing she had forgotten her glasses. Instead of rushing, Emma patiently described each dessert until the woman laughed and finally chose warm apple pie. Lucian watched the conversation with quiet fascination. Few people noticed details that small. Fewer still acted upon them without expecting recognition. A shadow suddenly appeared beside his table. His manager bowed slightly. "Mr. Ashford, I sincerely apologize if your server has been distracting you. I can assign someone else immediately." Lucian slowly looked up. "Why would you do that?" The manager hesitated. "She spends too much time helping everyone. Some guests prefer faster service." Lucian glanced toward Emma, who was now carrying another tray across the room. "My meal arrived hot. My coffee remained full." She anticipated every request before I spoke. His voice stayed calm, but each word landed with unmistakable weight. "I would say your restaurant is fortunate to have her." Relief flooded the manager's face. "Thank you, sir." As he hurried away, another waitress quietly approached Emma near the service station. "What did you do?" she whispered nervously. Emma looked confused. "Nothing. He has not stopped watching you since he arrived." Emma laughed softly while arranging fresh silverware. "Maybe he is wondering why the soup took so long." She had no idea that every movement she made was being carefully observed by someone who had spent centuries studying human nature. For hundreds of years Lucian had ruled kingdoms, negotiated impossible treaties, and watched civilizations rise and disappear. He had learned that power often wore beautiful clothes while kindness usually arrived unnoticed. Yet tonight, inside an ordinary neighborhood restaurant, he had encountered something he had not expected to find. Not destiny. Not magic. Simply a young waitress whose goodness appeared completely genuine. And for reasons even he could not yet explain, the ancient king found himself wondering whether meeting Emma Carter had been chance at all. Emma's shift finally slowed just after 8 o'clock. The dinner rush faded into scattered conversations, and the steady rhythm of the restaurant became easier to manage. She carried a fresh pot of coffee toward table 17, expecting to find the mysterious businessman scrolling through emails like every other executive who came through the restaurant. Instead, he was still watching the rain. Beyond the glass, headlights reflected across the wet pavement while people hurried beneath umbrellas, trying to outrun the storm. May I refill your coffee? Emma asked gently. Lucian looked away from the window. Please. She carefully poured the fresh coffee, the rich aroma rising between them. The rain is supposed to continue all night, she said politely. I hope you are not driving too far. Distance has never concerned me, he answered. Emma smiled. That sounds like someone who enjoys road trips. A faint expression crossed his face. Something like that. She placed the coffee pot back onto her tray. Would you like dessert? The apple pie has been surprisingly popular tonight. What would you choose? Emma laughed softly. You already trusted me once. And I was not disappointed. She thought for a second. Then the apple pie. Fresh from the oven. With vanilla ice cream if you do not mind something sweet. Then that is what I will have. As Emma walked toward the kitchen, Lucian quietly watched her disappear through the swinging doors. Adrian's earlier call echoed in his thoughts. The council had been waiting. Ancient families expected answers. Important matters demanded his attention. Yet none of them felt as urgent as understanding why an ordinary human woman carried herself with such quiet dignity despite obvious hardship. A few minutes later Emma returned balancing the warm dessert on one hand. Before she reached the table, the lights flickered once. Then again. Several guests glanced upward. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. The manager sighed. Hopefully the power stays on. Emma carefully placed the dessert before Lucian. Looks like the storm is getting stronger. At that exact moment the front door burst open as another wave of wind pushed rain into the lobby. A young delivery driver stepped inside, soaked from head to toe, carrying two heavy insulated bags. He looked exhausted. The manager frowned immediately. Employee entrance is around back. I am sorry, the young man said, shivering slightly. The alley is flooded. I only needed somewhere dry for 1 minute. Before the manager could answer, Emma quietly removed the dry cardigan she always kept folded near the service station for late nights. She walked over and offered it with a warm smile. Here. You will catch a cold standing in wet clothes. The driver looked embarrassed. I cannot take your sweater. You are borrowing it, Emma corrected kindly. You can bring it back another day if you really want to. He accepted it with grateful eyes. Thank you. Drive carefully, she said. The roads are getting slippery. The entire exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. Emma simply returned to her tables as though nothing unusual had happened. She never realized someone had witnessed every moment. Lucian rested one hand against the edge of the table, his thoughts quieter than they had been in many years. Centuries of ruling had taught him that loyalty could be purchased, respect could be commanded, and fear could control kingdoms. But genuine compassion could never be ordered. It either existed or it did not. Emma possessed it without effort. As she disappeared once more into the busy dining room, Lucian reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and removed an old silver coin no larger than a quarter. Ancient symbols surrounded its worn edge, though no ordinary eye would have recognized them. He placed the coin beside his untouched dessert and watched carefully. The moment Emma returned to clear the table, her fingertips brushed the weathered silver. The coin grew unexpectedly warm beneath her hand. Emma immediately pulled back in surprise. That is strange, she whispered, looking down at the coin before glancing apologetically toward Lucian. She had no idea that for the first time in nearly 400 years, the ancient relic had responded to the touch of a human. Emma quickly looked around the dining room, expecting someone else to have noticed what had just happened. No one seemed concerned. Customers continued eating. Waiters carried trays between tables. The storm still whispered against the windows. She slowly reached toward the silver coin again. This time it felt perfectly ordinary, cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. I must have imagined it, she murmured with an embarrassed smile. Lucian watched every movement without changing his expression. For centuries. That was how long the king's sigil had remained silent. Forged by the first vampire monarchs, the ancient silver recognized only those connected to forgotten promises sealed long before modern cities ever existed. It had rested cold in the hands of kings, queens, scholars, generals, and nobles. Yet it had answered an ordinary waitress wearing a faded apron. That was impossible. Or at least it should have been. Emma carefully placed the coin back onto the table. I am sorry. It just felt warm for a second. Perhaps your hands are colder than you realized, Lucian replied calmly. She laughed softly. That is probably it. Her pager vibrated from inside her apron. Another table needed assistance. Please enjoy your dessert, Mr. Ashford. Before leaving, she hesitated. And, thank you. Lucian tilted his head slightly. For what? Most customers complain when dinner takes longer because of the weather. You have been very patient. Patience is easier when the person serving you genuinely cares. Emma smiled, slightly surprised by the compliment, before hurrying away once again. Lucian remained seated after she disappeared. His fingers slowly closed around the ancient coin. The silver had completely cooled. Whatever had awakened it existed only in Emma's presence. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. Adrian. Your Majesty, the familiar voice said quietly. The council has become concerned. They have sent representatives into the city. Lucian's expression remained unreadable. For me? Not exactly. Adrian hesitated. They detected a brief pulse from the king's sigil. Silence settled between them. Rain continued tapping softly against the glass. Finally Lucian spoke. How many detected it? At least 6 elders. Another pause followed. They believe the relic may have found someone. Lucian looked toward Emma, who was now helping an elderly couple bundle themselves into warm coats before leaving the restaurant. She even walked them carefully to the front door because the entrance floor had become slippery from the rain. She never noticed the businessman quietly watching from across the room. Do nothing, Lucian said at last. Tell the council their assumptions are premature. Adrian lowered his voice even further. With respect, Your Majesty, if they discover the human before you understand what she is, they will intervene. I am aware. Lucian ended the call. Outside, a black luxury sedan slowly rolled past the restaurant before disappearing into the rain. Emma never looked through the windows long enough to notice it. She was too busy collecting empty dishes and thanking customers for coming despite the weather. But Lucian noticed. He recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to one of the oldest noble families in the vampire kingdom. They had not come to enjoy dinner. They had come because ancient magic had briefly whispered across the city. Emma returned carrying the final check. I hope everything was all right tonight. Lucian accepted the bill without looking at it. Everything was excellent. She placed a small mint beside the receipt and smiled. Thank you for spending your evening with us. He reached for a pen, signed the receipt, then quietly folded it closed before standing. Emma did not look at the amount. She never checked while customers remained at the table. It was a habit her mother had taught her years ago. Respect first. Curiosity later. Lucian slipped into his overcoat and walked toward the entrance. Just before opening the door, he looked back one final time. Emma was laughing with a little girl who had waved goodbye from her family's booth. The simple moment lingered in the warm restaurant while rain continued falling beyond the glass. For the first time in centuries, the vampire king found himself changing his plans. The council could wait another day. Tomorrow, he intended to return. Emma did not notice anything unusual until the restaurant had almost emptied. She gathered the last stack of menus, wiped down table 17, and finally unfolded the signed receipt before carrying it to the register. Her eyes widened. The tip was larger than she usually earned during an entire week of double shifts. She immediately looked toward the entrance, but the mysterious businessman had already disappeared into the rainy night. "There has to be a mistake," she whispered. Her manager glanced at the receipt and nearly dropped the clipboard in his hand. "No mistake. Mr. Ashford never signs anything he does not mean." Emma stared at the number again. The money would cover another hospital payment and still leave enough for groceries. She closed her eyes for a brief second, overwhelmed by quiet relief. "I hope I can thank him if he ever comes back." Her manager gave a small laugh. "People like him rarely visit the same place twice." Emma simply smiled and continued cleaning. She had learned long ago that good moments should be appreciated instead of questioned. Across the city, however, another conversation was unfolding beneath vaulted stone ceilings that had stood for centuries. Blue flames flickered along ancient walls while 6 elegantly dressed figures sat around a circular obsidian table. None of them looked older than 40, yet each pair of eyes carried the weight of impossible years. A silver coin rested at the center of the table. Its surface glowed faintly before fading once again. "It awakened," one elder said quietly. "Only for a heartbeat," another replied. "That has never happened by accident." Adrian stood several feet away with his hands folded behind his back. His Majesty instructed that no action be taken. An older woman with silver hair lifted one graceful eyebrow. "The king does not command the ancient laws. If the sigil has recognized someone, the council has a responsibility to know who." Adrian remained respectfully silent. He understood exactly how dangerous curiosity could become inside the royal court. Back in Boston, Emma finally clocked out just after 10:30. She wrapped herself in her light jacket before stepping outside. The storm had weakened to a gentle drizzle, leaving the streets washed clean beneath glowing streetlights. Her aging blue sedan waited alone near the edge of the parking lot. As she unlocked the driver's door, she noticed the dry cardigan was still missing. The delivery driver had forgotten to return it. She smiled to herself. "I hope it kept him warm." The sweater had been old anyway. If someone needed it more than she did, that was enough. She climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove toward the small apartment she shared with her mother. The heater barely worked, and the windshield occasionally squeaked despite new wiper blades, but tonight those little inconveniences felt much smaller. Hope had a way of making old cars feel newer. Several blocks behind her, another vehicle quietly entered traffic. Its headlights remained far enough away to avoid attention. Inside sat 2 well-dressed passengers whose calm expressions revealed almost nothing. "That is her," the driver said softly. The woman in the passenger seat studied Emma's car through the rain-speckled windshield. "An ordinary waitress," she murmured. "So it appears. Do we report to the council?" The woman remained silent for several moments before answering. "Not yet. His Majesty is already involved. We observe first." The black sedan slowed at the next intersection while Emma continued driving without ever realizing she had gained quiet observers. 20 minutes later she parked beside a modest brick apartment building. One window on the 3rd floor still glowed warmly. Her mother was awake waiting for her, just as she always did after late shifts. Emma hurried upstairs carrying a small paper bag containing leftover soup the chef had insisted she take home. She unlocked the apartment door and immediately heard her mother's gentle voice from the living room. "Long night?" Emma smiled as she stepped inside. Actually, something wonderful happened today. She had no idea that at the exact same moment, high above the sleeping city, Lucian stood alone in front of the towering windows of his private residence, looking toward the distant neighborhood where a single apartment light still burned. After centuries of believing destiny belonged only to forgotten legends, the Vampire King found himself unable to stop thinking about one ordinary waitress whose kindness had awakened something far older than either of them yet understood. Emma's mother, Grace Carter, looked up from the worn sofa with the familiar smile that had carried both of them through years of difficult seasons. A blanket rested across her knees, and an unfinished crossword puzzle lay on the coffee table beside a steaming mug of herbal tea. "You are smiling," Grace said with quiet amusement. "That usually means either something wonderful happened or something expensive broke." Emma laughed as she placed the container of soup into the refrigerator. "Definitely the first one." She sat beside her mother and carefully handed over the folded receipt. Grace adjusted her reading glasses before looking at the number. Her eyes slowly widened. "Emma. I know. Who left this?" "A customer." Grace studied her daughter's face. "Tell me everything." Emma described the evening from beginning to end. The quiet businessman. The simple conversations. The generous tip. The strange silver coin that had briefly felt warm in her hand. Grace listened carefully without interrupting, though something about the last detail caused a thoughtful expression to settle across her face. "A warm coin?" she asked softly. Emma shrugged. "It only lasted a second. It was probably my imagination." Grace smiled gently, but her eyes drifted toward the old wooden bookshelf standing beside the window. On the highest shelf rested a small carved jewelry box that had belonged to Emma's grandmother. It had remained unopened for years. "Perhaps," Grace answered quietly. "Sometimes unusual moments are simply unusual moments." Emma nodded, kissed her mother's forehead, and disappeared into her bedroom, exhausted from the long day. Once the bedroom door closed, Grace remained seated without moving. Her gaze slowly returned to the old wooden box. After several minutes she stood, crossed the room, and carefully lifted it from the shelf. The hinges creaked softly as she opened it. Inside lay only a faded photograph, a silver pendant, and a yellowed handwritten letter tied neatly with a blue ribbon. Grace gently touched the pendant without removing it. "Not yet," she whispered to herself before quietly closing the lid again. Across the city, sunrise painted the Boston skyline in soft shades of gold. Lucian stood alone on a stone balcony overlooking the waking city. Hundreds of floors below, morning traffic slowly filled the streets while distant church bells echoed through the cool autumn air. Adrian approached silently behind him. "The council requests another audience." Lucian continued watching the horizon. "Denied." Adrian hesitated. "They are becoming impatient." "Good." Adrian almost smiled. Very few rulers could frustrate ancient vampire elders simply by refusing to attend meetings. "Our observers remained outside the apartment throughout the night," Adrian reported. "Nothing unusual occurred." "That is because you are looking for unusual events," Lucian replied. "I asked you to observe the woman." Adrian lowered his head respectfully. "Then my report changes." She shared her dinner with her mother before going to bed. She thanked the restaurant chef in a message before midnight for allowing her to bring leftovers home. At 6:30 this morning she left for a neighborhood grocery store before her next shift because eggs were on sale. Lucian finally turned toward him. "Anything else?" Adrian almost sounded confused by the question. She helped an elderly neighbor carry laundry upstairs before leaving the building. Silence settled between them. Finally Lucian nodded once. "Continue watching." Adrian looked genuinely puzzled. "Your Majesty, forgive me, but why?" Lucian's gray eyes rested on the distant neighborhood where Emma's apartment stood hidden among thousands of buildings. "Because every report confirms exactly the same thing." "And what is that?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Her kindness does not depend on who is watching." At that exact moment, several miles away, Emma stepped through the front doors of Ashwood Grill expecting another ordinary workday. She tied on her apron, greeted her coworkers, and reached for the reservation book resting beside the hostess stand. Her smile faded slightly. One familiar name had already been entered in neat handwriting beneath the evening reservations. Table 17. Mr. Lucian Ashford. Arrival time. 6 o'clock sharp. Emma read the reservation twice before quietly closing the book. Most customers returned because they enjoyed the food. Somehow she doubted that was the reason Mr. Ashford had reserved the same table again. "Everything all right?" another waitress asked while tying her apron. Emma smiled. "I think so. One of yesterday's customers is coming back." "Already?" the waitress whispered. "That never happens with him." Emma simply shrugged. She refused to let curiosity distract her from another busy shift. Throughout the afternoon she focused on polishing glasses, folding napkins, and preparing the dining room before the dinner crowd arrived. Every few minutes she caught herself glancing at the clock. Not because she was anxious, she told herself, but because she wanted to thank him properly for the generous tip that had helped her family so much. At exactly 5:58, the front doors opened. Lucian Ashford entered wearing another dark overcoat, looking as calm as though the entire city moved according to his schedule instead of the other way around. The manager hurried forward immediately. "Welcome back, Mr. Ashford." Lucian acknowledged him with a polite nod before his eyes quietly searched the room. They stopped the moment they found Emma arranging silverware near the hostess stand. She noticed him almost at the same time and walked over with a warm smile. "Good evening. It is nice to see you again." "And you," Lucian answered. "May I thank you before we begin?" Emma looked genuinely puzzled. "For what?" "For recommending the apple pie yesterday." She laughed softly. "I was expecting you to thank the chef instead. The recommendation belonged to you." She smiled, slightly embarrassed, before leading him toward table 17. Around the dining room several employees exchanged curious glances. 2 nights in a row. The city's most mysterious businessman had returned for exactly the same waitress. As Emma handed him the menu, she quietly said, "I also wanted to thank you." Lucian looked up. "The tip you left helped my family more than you probably realized." There was no rehearsed gratitude in her voice. Only simple honesty. "Then I am glad I left it." Before Emma could respond, the restaurant lights dimmed unexpectedly for a single heartbeat. Every bulb flickered once before returning to normal. Customers glanced upward with mild confusion. Someone joked about the old electrical system, and conversation quickly resumed. Only Lucian noticed something far stranger. Resting inside the pocket of his overcoat, the ancient silver coin had become warm again. Much warmer than before. He remained perfectly still while his senses quietly reached beyond ordinary human perception. The warmth did not come from the restaurant. It came from Emma herself. At the far end of the dining room, 2 elegantly dressed strangers entered without making reservations. A distinguished older gentleman and a woman with silver hair accepted a quiet corner table while politely declining menus. Their eyes never lingered on Lucian for long, but they repeatedly observed Emma whenever she crossed the room. Lucian recognized them immediately. Members of the council. They had ignored his instructions. Adrian's warning echoed through his thoughts. If they discover the human before you understand what she is, they will intervene. Emma approached the new guests with the same cheerful kindness she showed everyone else. "Good evening. Welcome to Ashwood Grill. Can I start you with coffee or tea?" The silver-haired woman studied Emma carefully before offering a gentle smile. "Coffee would be lovely." As Emma poured the fresh coffee, the elderly gentleman intentionally placed a polished silver spoon near the edge of the table. The moment Emma's fingertips brushed the handle, the spoon gave off the faintest shimmer, almost like moonlight dancing across still water. Emma paused only briefly before continuing to fill the cups, never realizing anything unusual had happened. Across the room, Lucian's expression remained calm, but inside, certainty settled where questions had lived for centuries. It was no longer only the king's sigil responding to Emma Carter. Ancient objects forged long before either of them had been born were beginning to recognize her one by one. And the council had just witnessed it with their own eyes. Emma continued serving every table exactly as she always had, completely unaware that two ancient worlds had quietly begun to revolve around her. She refilled coffee, delivered fresh bread, and smiled warmly whenever someone thanked her. To every customer inside Ashwood Grill, it was another ordinary evening. Only Lucian and the two silent council members understood that nothing about this night was ordinary anymore. The silver-haired woman gently placed her coffee cup back onto its saucer before looking toward her companion. They exchanged only the slightest glance, yet centuries of partnership allowed entire conversations to pass without words. Finally, the older gentleman spoke softly enough that no human ear could hear. It responded. Twice, the woman answered. No artifact has awakened like this since the Age of Crowns. Lucian remained seated without turning toward them. You have seen enough. His calm voice carried across the room as though distance itself obeyed him. The two elders slowly rose from their table. Before leaving, the silver-haired woman looked at Emma one last time with an expression that held neither fear nor judgment, only profound curiosity. Then both disappeared into the rainy Boston evening without another word. Emma returned carrying Lucian's dinner just as the restaurant settled into its usual rhythm again. Everything smells wonderful tonight, she said while carefully placing the plate before him. I hope it is as good as yesterday. Lucian looked at the meal only briefly before meeting her eyes. May I ask you a question? Of course. Has anyone ever told you that unusual things seem to happen around you? Emma laughed quietly. Only when I accidentally drop trays. I am serious. She considered the question for a moment before shaking her head. No. My life has been pretty ordinary. Lucian almost smiled. Perhaps not as ordinary as you believe. Before Emma could ask what he meant, another server called her name from across the dining room. A large party had just arrived unexpectedly. I should get back to work, she said apologetically. Thank you again for coming back. I believe I will continue returning, Lucian replied. Emma smiled politely, assuming he simply liked the restaurant, and hurried away. Nearly 2 hours later, the final guests began leaving. Emma collected empty dishes from table 17 only to discover that Lucian had already gone. Beside the signed receipt rested a small folded card bearing only one elegant sentence. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. Emma read the message twice before carefully slipping it into her apron pocket. It was a simple note, yet somehow it felt far more valuable than the generous tip he had left the night before. Outside, Lucian stood beneath the covered entrance watching soft rain drift through the streetlights. Adrian approached from the waiting car. The council has returned to the castle. And their conclusion? Adrian opened a sealed envelope bearing the council's ancient crest. They will consult the Royal Chronicle at first light. Lucian's expression remained perfectly composed, but his eyes grew thoughtful. The Royal Chronicle was older than any living vampire. According to legend, every name connected to the royal bloodline had appeared within its pages long before history unfolded. Most believed it was merely a ceremonial record. Very few knew the truth. Adrian lowered his voice. If the Chronicle reveals her name, everything changes, Lucian finished quietly. High above the city, hidden within a forgotten chamber beneath the royal castle, an enormous book slowly opened by itself. Dust rose gently from its ancient pages as invisible winds turned yellowed parchment one sheet at a time. The book stopped without human hands guiding it. Fresh golden letters quietly appeared where the page had been blank only moments before. They formed a single name written in elegant script that had not been used for 400 years. Emma Carter. And beneath her name, another line slowly revealed itself. The future queen.